What's up, YouTube? Mike Soul. This is the introduction of a new series that I'm going to start doing, which is I'm going to start talking about teams, NBA teams, that were good and sometimes even great, yet they never quite reached their full potential. Alright? And they're teams that are remembered fondly by NBA fans or fans of the franchise. In some ways, there's even, while there's fond memories, there's oftentimes, thoughts of what could have been and what should have been and what would have happened if such and such didn't happen. And the first team that popped in my mind were the mid-90s Orlando Magic team. You have this series called Unsung on TV One. Well, this is the unsung version of the NBA. All right. So let's get this started. The Orlando Magic was started as a franchise in 1989, and as you would expect with an inaugural franchise, they sucked. All right. That first season, their leading scorers were Terry Catledge, who was putting about 19 points a game, and the aging Reggie Theus. Still a pretty good scorer, but not what he once was with the Bulls and the Kings. As a matter of fact, I think he only had 2 more years in the league, and Reggie was putting up about 18 points a game. And Reggie Theus was scoring about 18 points a game. The aging Reggie Theus, who only had 2 more years in the league before he would retire. With Orlando being a young franchise, they didn't want to rely on veteran scoring from players who would not be factors for much longer. So people forget that the first true star for the Orlando Magic was Nick Anderson. Make no mistake about it, Nick Anderson was their go-to guy. All right. During his rookie year, he averaged double-figure scoring, and by the 1991-92 season, Nick Anderson was averaging 19.9 points, 6.4 rebounds, 2.7 assists, 1.6 steals. He shot a respectable 46% from the field and was emerging as a three-point threat, shooting 35% from downtown. So Nick Anderson, those of you who saw him in the latter part of his career, when he was mostly just a spot-up three-point shooter, you guys don't remember him when he was really a critical part of the Orlando Magic team. The second guy of the nucleus of the mid-1990s Orlando Magic team, the dominant Magic team to arrive, was Dennis Scott. All right, Dennis Scott at that time was the 4th overall pick in the 1990 NBA draft. He was also the reigning ACC Men's Basketball Player of the Year. He was part of the Georgia Tech Lethal Weapon 3, that included himself, Kenny Anderson, and Brian Oliver. And what Dennis Scott was mostly noted for was his ability to knock down three-pointers. He was one of the first guys to take threes, along with Michael Adams. And maybe you could consider a guy like Danny Ainge and Dan Marley at the time, too. They're probably one of the few guys at that time I could think of that really took three-pointers in a prolific manner. Larry Bird took three-pointers, but he never really shot that many threes. I think the most three-pointers Bird ever shot may have been less than 140 or so, or 150 in a season. These guys were taking 3, 4, or more three-point attempts at the time. These were the guys that really popularized the three-point shot in the early 1990s and made it to a staple of the game to this day. That's why Dennis Scott, though he's not a great NBA player, he was, to me at least, a a pivotal player because he was instrumental in helping to popularize that shot in the league. But like I said, Dennis Scott, his rookie year, he averaged 15.7 points, and he was a scoring machine. And when he was on, it was something beautiful to watch. The third player of the mid 1990s Orlando Magic nucleus to arrive was also not only the best player on the team, but the most dominant player of the 1990s and probably of the modern era, and that would be Shaquille O'Neal. Drafted with the number one pick from LSU in the 1992 draft. Shaquille O'Neal, the young Shaquille O'Neal, to me was a better overall player, better overall athlete, and a better player in certain areas. I thought that he was a better player on defense when he was younger, as opposed to when he was older. When he was bigger, stronger, but not necessarily faster or quicker. I also thought when Shaq first came into the league, I think he's about 295 pounds, as opposed to later on in his career when his weight got up to maybe 350, 360. And he wasn't as great a leaper. He wasn't, and also he wasn't as good a shot blocker and rebounder later on in his career. But when Shaq was younger, his rookie year, especially his first 2 years, you could kind of compare him in a lot of ways to David Robinson, except he was a bigger, stronger version of David Robinson. Orlando Magic really improved by leaps and bounds that season. And while they still didn't make the postseason in 1992-93, they came very close. They ended up being the ninth seed of the Eastern Conference. And Shaquille O'Neal won Rookie of the Year. I think he averaged something like 23.4 points per game, 13.9 rebounds per game. As I indicated before, I thought he was a better rebounder, a better leaper when he was younger and thinner. I think he shot like 56% from the field, but he was an incredibly raw NBA player on offense in a lot of ways. He just did not have a lot of moves, and he scored a lot of his buckets with raw power. But he was just a dominant force. His first game in the NBA, his first game in the NBA they played, he pulled in 18 rebounds. So this is the type of player that he was. Despite the dominance of Shaquille O'Neal in his rookie year, the Orlando Magic still missed the postseason, although they came close with a 41-41 record. It wasn't until the 1993-94 season that the nucleus of the mid-1990s Orlando Magic team was nearly complete. In 1993, then assistant coach Brian Hill was elevated to head coach following the departure of Matt Guokas. And also during the 1993 NBA draft, the Orlando Magic selected Chris Webber. Then they traded that pick to Golden State to receive shooting guard / point guard Anthony Hardaway. Hardaway quickly blossomed in the Orlando Magic system. Before him, the starting point guard was Scott Skiles, who was a very good point guard, but he was only 6'1", and he sometimes struggled to get the ball to Shaquille O'Neal. And Anthony Hardaway, being a big guard, 6'7", I think about 205 or 10 pounds at the time. He was he was very athletic. He was quick. and he had a very good overall game. He was a very good passer. He had a, from what I remember in his prime, he had a very good post game. Uh, he could take you off the dribble. He could do a lot of different things. And in his rookie year, he had a, like I said, he started off on the bench, but eventually replaced Scott Skiles in the starting lineup. And the Orlando Magic team that year went on to win 50 games, and they quickly started to become a power. To me, though, this guy right here, although you'll generally hear people talk about Penny and Shaq, and rightfully so, this guy right here was probably the biggest key to the Magic's success. Now, I'm not saying he was the best, all right, but he was key. He was pivotal because he brought in another dominant rebounder, all right? Because I always think rebounding is very important to winning basketball games. He brought in another dominant rebounder, and also he brought in a player with a championship pedigree, a player who knew what it takes to go the extra mile, to go harder. He knew things that you had to do to reach that championship level of play. And he brought that to Orlando Magic, all right? I'm talking about Horace Grant. Now, I'm speaking as a Bulls fan here, so I'm going to try to be as impartial as possible. The year he left Chicago was his only year as an All-Star. He put up 15 points, 11 rebounds, over 3 assists, 1 block, 1 steal per game. All right. He gave the Chicago Bulls organization the indication that he was going to resign. According to Jerry Krause, I believe it was. Now, Jerry Krause is a known liar, so I take that with a grain of salt. But also, I think Jerry Reinsdorf said this, so I'm not certain. But anyway, Bulls management indicated that Horace Grant gave them a handshake confirmation that he was going to return to the Chicago Bulls. And as we all know, he didn't do that. He signed with the Orlando Magic. And his departure really did hurt the Chicago Bulls. As I said, the Bulls became a lot softer down low. But this guy right here really helped to elevate the Orlando Magic for the next season. The 1994-95 season was, at the time, the most successful season in Orlando Magic history. They won 57 games that year, but they were just unbeatable. I remember you could not beat this team at home, the old arena. If I remember correctly, that team went 39-2 at home. All right, they generally just beat the hell out of people at Orlando. I forgot the victory margin at the arena, but I thought it was double. I thought the average margin of victory was over 10 points, if I'm not mistaken. And they were the first seed of the Eastern Conference. 1994-95 season, Shaq led the league in scoring, having come in second the year before. That year, he led the league in scoring, averaging 29.3 points per game. Horace Grant had another solid year. I believe he averaged something around 12 points and a little under 10 rebounds per game playing with Orlando. So he was a big help on that team. And all of the players just came together. Their bench had improved a lot that year. I think, now I'm going off from memory on this video, someone can fact check me, I might be a little off, but I think that 94-95 season was the rookie year for Darrell Armstrong too, who would become a more dominant player for Orlando Magic later on, past the period I'm talking about. But that team was just so dominant, man. And as a Chicago Bulls fan, I really seriously considered, like, wow, this is the team of the future. You know what I'm saying? Like, this is a team that appealed to younger people. Shaq was in his early 20s. Anthony Hardaway was in his early 20s. Most of the players on their team at the time were still in their 20s. I remember in the playoffs that year in '95, they beat Boston 3 games to 1. I think the first game of the series, they beat Boston by like 47 points. All right, they was just looking incredible. So personally, as a Chicago Bulls fan, the next series that they had, it's kind of painful to recollect, man. It was Chicago Bulls, with Michael Jordan just coming back out of retirement. And we played Orlando Magic. And I remember going into the series, Michael was wearing number 45, and I believe we lost game 1 of that series. And Nick Anderson made some comment to the fact that he said, well, number 45 doesn't rev up the way number 23 used to, whatever. And then I think the next game, I think Jordan wore number 23. And it was either the second game or the third game of the series, I can't remember now. But Jordan wore number 23. And he scored like 39 or 40 points. And we won. And it gave you some hope that we gave some hope as a Bulls fan that we could win this series maybe, but we just had a lot of weaknesses that year, man. The team still didn't have the right chemistry. Jordan wasn't the same player. He was trying to play similar to the style that he played before he retired, but he was older. He was a little bit slower. And also, in hindsight, I think he was tiring himself out by the fourth quarters of a lot of those games. And we missed rebounding. And one of the most painful fucking shit for me to see was after they beat us, was seeing this shit, Horace Grant, celebrating, like, yeah, like, you fucking traitor, man. That's what I really fucking hated them, man. I just wanted, I knew the next team that was going to play was more likely to be Indiana. And I was just hoping so badly that Indiana would beat these guys. But it wasn't to be. Even though that Pacers team took them to 7 games, Orlando eliminated Indiana. They were the Eastern Conference champions. And it felt like the coronation of a new dynasty to me, man, back then. And I was like, well, oh boy, I just don't see anybody beating this team, man. So the NBA Finals starts, and I just didn't think that Houston could do it, man. I thought Houston was on a Cinderella run. They were the 6th seed. They were just defying the odds, beating teams on the road, because throughout the playoffs, they never had the home court advantage in any series. But I just thought it was going to run out that luck, And early on, my suspicions and my fears felt like they were confirmed, because I think it was in the first half of the game or so, Houston was down by like 20 points against Orlando, and they were at the old arena, and I was like, oh, well, this series is over. Matter of fact, a buddy of mine, man, Jason, was telling me, we was talking the other day about this series, and he pretty much turned the series off, man, back then, because he didn't like Orlando. He thought the game was over. One of the things that brought Houston back into that game was Kenny fucking Smith, man. He was on fire in fuego, as they said back in the 90s. He basically had a career game as a Houston Rocket. Near the end of the fourth quarter, he had tied the NBA record for most three-pointers in the finals game. He had tied the record shared at the time by Michael Jordan, Bill Laimbeer, and Michael Cooper with 6. And, they had brought the game back to within reach, partly because of his phenomenal shooting display. Still, though, despite all of the heroics, it appeared that the game was over. Orlando had a 3-point lead, with 10 seconds left. And there was a foul called on Robert Ory. And Nick Anderson stepped to the line. Now, Nick Anderson wasn't Reggie Miller at the foul line, but he was dependable. He was, if I remember correctly, he was about a 70+% free throw shooter. So you expect him to make most of the time both, at least one foul shot. Now right here, Nick had already missed the first foul shot. And he was having a real good game. You see 22 points, 5 assists. And he missed again. However, as you see right here, he got the offensive rebound, and he was fouled again. So he's going to shoot 2 more foul shots while they already have a 3-point lead with probably around 8 seconds left. So it seems in favor that Orlando was still going to win this game. You know how important it is to win the first game of a playoff series. So it still looked pretty good that Orlando was going to win. He misses, and he missed badly. I mean, badly he missed that foul shot. And he takes the other one and misses badly. Houston gets the rebound. 5.6 seconds remaining. Nick Anderson is pissed the fuck off that he missed that foul shot. Especially the last one. I mean, you know, that right there had to be a mental thing, man. There's no way that a 75% foul shooter misses 4 straight free throws like that. And then Kenny Smith, I remember right here, he did some real.
He's tied the game at 110 with 1 6/10 seconds remaining. And that is an NBA Finals record for Kenny Smith. That's his.
Now I shot for a minute to show that part. Kenny Smith, they gave it to Kenny Smith, the guy who'd been on fire all day. Hit an NBA record, Finals record, 7 3-pointers right there. Record has just been broken by Ray Allen. But still, I mean, I always like that little pump fake move that he did right here against Penny to free himself open. And right there, Nick Anderson has me thinking, what the fuck? The game went into overtime, and the pivotal play was toward the end where Clyde Drexler went for a drive to the basket, and Shaq went for the block, and that freed up Hakeem Olajuwon on the weak side. And when Clyde Drexler missed the layup, Hakeem Olajuwon took the ball back in for the apparent victory, which ended up being a victory. And they stole the game. They were down by 20 points. They stole that game, and Orlando never recovered from that. If I'm not mistaken, in Game 2, Orlando came out once again and built something like a 20-point lead, and Houston came back to beat them again. And then after that, Orlando was just pretty much gone as a team. They probably weren't as cohesive anymore as a unit, and Houston just swept them. And it was sort of embarrassing for Orlando to get swept like that, considering the fact that they probably were the more talented team. And that was attested to the fact that after the 1995 finals, for maybe 2 or 3 years, I can't remember the exact total time period, but for a couple of years, Houston never beat Orlando again in the regular season. I think it might have been like 6 straight losses, if you include the regular season, that Houston had toward Orlando after that. Orlando never let Houston beat them again. But the regular season doesn't really count. Playoffs do. The very next year, all right, Orlando wins 60 games. But anyway, the next year, the 1995-96 season, Orlando looked even better. They won 60 games that year, still a franchise record, if I'm not mistaken. Shaq looked good when he did play He only played 54 games that year. This was the first year that I can recall that Shaq's less than stellar commitment to conditioning started to come into effect. Um, but like I said, when he did play, he still was spectacular. What I remember from that year was the emergence of Penny Hardaway. You can make the argument that he was the best player on that team that year. He was an MVP caliber candidate that year. If I remember correctly, he and John Stockton were the only guards to shoot over 50% that year. Uh, I don't remember his numbers off the hand anymore, but I think he averaged something like 20, I want to say 24 points, 6 rebounds, 7 assists, 2 steals. I think he shot 51% from the field. I might be a little off with the points per game. But like I said, he had a phenomenal season. He was earning comparisons to Magic Johnson. And a lot of people, like I said, saw his team as a team of the future. Dennis Scott set a record at the time, 267 three-pointers. He also set a record at the time for most three-pointers in a game with 11 later that season. So this was a team that looked like they were just going to be the team of the future and the team to beat in the Eastern Conference. However, no one saw how good that the Bulls were going to be. All right, the acquisition of Dennis Rodman during the offseason was a big pickup. The improvement of Michael Jordan, the way he sort of altered his game to fit his declining athletic ability, but expanding post game, was brilliant. Scottie Pippen was still near the prime of his career that year. He was becoming even a much better three-point shooter. I remember that year too. No one saw this coming. All right, nobody saw this team with the 72 games. The defensive intensity they showed. A team that was 41-3 at the All-Star break. 2 separate 18-game winning streaks in the same season. No, no one saw that. And that was the matchup that everyone was waiting to see in the playoffs, was Orlando and Chicago. So this was a pivotal series, man, because on the one end, you got Orlando Magic, the supposed team of the future, with the supposed point guard of the future, to end up being one of the greatest players of all time. Shaq will be the greatest center of all time. All right, this is the team of the future. And on the other hand, you have Chicago Bulls, who they saw as a team of the past. People who were fans of the Chicago Bulls or rooted for the Bulls saw this as the season of redemption for Michael Jordan, the season where he's going to regain his throne as the greatest player of all time, and the Bulls their rightful place as the hierarchy of the NBA. So everyone's watching this game. Everyone's waiting for the series to start. And while you're watching game one, you're in shock because this is supposed to be like Ali and Frazier, and it was more like Ali and Holmes. The Bulls beat the shit out of Orlando. Alright? It was just a fucking ass kicking. I do recall Hardaway having a big game. I think he scored like 38 points that game, but it also equaled the margin of victory for the Bulls. They won 121-83 that game. I remember game 2 of that series. Orlando was motivated. They came out, and at one point that game had an 18-point lead. But Chicago, as they did time and time again that year, came back, took the lead, won the game. Game 3, I think Orlando was mentally defeated. They gave up pretty much. I remember that being a poor performance from Michael Jordan in Game 3. But I remember Scottie having a big game in Game 3 of that series. And Chicago won on the road. Game 4 was a pretty close game at first. Michael Jordan had a very, very big game. I think he scored 45 points that game. Shot the ball very well. Hit key shots toward the end to push the lead. And for the second year in a row, actually the third year in a row, Orlando Magic was swept in the playoffs because they were swept in '94 by the Pacers in the first round. '95 they got swept by the Houston Rockets. '96 they got swept by the Bulls. And this is when I first started to hear the rumblings that Shaq was dissatisfied. Shaq wanted to leave the Orlando Magic. I remember reading Slam magazine and it was saying that Shaq felt like a big fish in a little pond in Orlando. He wanted to be in a bigger atmosphere. And the Lakers were the team that he desired, and that's where he went. And Orlando just wasn't the same team after that. This was a seismic shift in the NBA when Shaq signed with the Los Angeles Lakers. After that, with the departure of Shaquille O'Neal that year, I recall thinking that, okay, well, Penny's probably going to take a larger role offensively. Um, you know, I thought that he would even possibly compete with Michael Jordan for the scoring title, but that didn't happen. Unfortunately, that was the first year that Penny Hardaway had any significant issues with injuries. He only played 59 or 60 games that year, and Nick Anderson and Dennis Scott have shown further decline as overall players. Matter of fact, Nick Anderson only shot 40% from the free throw line that year, illustrating what I was talking about before, where I think it psychologically damaged him that game in the finals where he missed those 4 consecutive free throws. And Orlando went from 60 wins to 45 wins. They played against the Miami Heat team that year that won 61 games. And although Penny did have a pretty good game, in one of them, I think he scored like 42 points. Once again, Orlando was disappointing, and they lost in the first round. It was during the 1996-97 season that the Orlando Magic fired Brian Hill, and after that season, they saw the departure of Dennis Scott. The very next year, they hired Chuck Daly as coach. The first season, they only went 500. Next year, during the strike season, they went 33-17. But Anthony Hardaway as a player began to decline already. The injuries took a big toll on him as far as his explosiveness. I remember his lateral ability to move laterally wasn't as good anymore, and he lost a lot of his hops. And he just wasn't the same guy anymore. Nick Anderson, after a couple of years, started to show signs of decline. And although this Orlando Magic team had improved a little bit toward 2000, they never ever became a championship contender. And I show this picture of Michael Jordan and Anthony Hardaway because it just shows the change in fortunes of these two guys. In 1995, it looked like Penny Hardaway was the future of the NBA. It looked like Michael Jordan may be the type of guy who his time had passed. 3 years later, Anthony Hardaway was already what could have been, what should have been type guy. And Michael Jordan had already, in many people's eyes, cemented himself as the greatest player in NBA history. And that's what I've always remembered about the Orlando Magic team. They could have been one of the great dynasties of all time. But unfortunate circumstances just got in their way. Perhaps it was the fact that they were just too young. They just didn't know how to win. And maybe it's just the fact that they just played again, in the wrong era, maybe. You take away the Chicago Bulls, maybe they could have won a couple of championships. But this is my in-depth take on one of the unsung teams of in NBA history, the mid-90s Orlando Magic. Thank you for watching.